let's get rolling. I'll give the brief preface for those of you who are new to Wheel and Anchor, and I do see a number of names. Um, I do see a number of names that are familiar, but I think for a lot of you, you may be new for Wheel and Anchor. So let me give you the short synopsis as to what we're all about. The mission behind when we started Wheel and Anchor just a few years ago is to bring travelers together. So my experience, which is over 30 years in the travel business, is that whenever you have a group of people who somehow are acquainted with each other, somehow know each other, either loosely or are close friends, but you just have a lot more fun along the way. So we are all about bringing like-minded people who have the same sort of attitude towards travel and exploration and experiencing cultures on our trips. And as you can see from some of the photos here, we generally have a marvelous time. So that's what we're all about. My personal mission for each of you is to become well-traveled and well-connected. And for me, and I think the same thing, it's not just my perspective, but a lot of our members say the same thing. Being well-traveled is more than just about than checking off your bucket list. It's about getting into a country and really trying to sort of understand contextually about the way of life there. And that's the fascinating part, I find, is that, you know, pointing out the monuments, all the rest of it, there's some spectacular buildings and monuments around the world, but it's about the people and becoming connected to those. So that's why I put well-traveled and well-connected together. You in Wheel and Anchor, we find people meet friends who they you know stay in contact with well after the trip. But you also meet interesting people along the way. I can think about the guides that we had in Egypt last year, just such incredible individuals. We had one of them on our webinar week before last, 2 weeks ago, I guess it was. And everybody have such fond memories. So we really established that connection. So that's what we're about at Wheel and Anchor. On our webinar today, my name is Gordon. I'm the founder of Wheel and Anchor, so I'll be doing all the presenting today. And I'm joined by Paula Czarnik, who is our senior trip specialist and the person who is most likely to answer the phone if you dial into our office, and Joel Curry, who is our co-founder and does the technical support for our webinar today. And so they'll be monitoring the chat box if you do have questions or comments as we go along. Today, our plan, as usual, for this kind of a webinar, we have different webinar formats, but in one of our trip webinars, it's really about taking you and helping you as a traveler to stimulate your curiosity about this incredible region. I mean, I'm sure you know, you've heard some things about it, but you want to find out more. And it's my job to take you on a little virtual journey through these countries, so you get a sense of what you would experience if you would go. Even if you opt not to go on the trip, we hope that you learn something along the way. So that's what our subject is today. It's Israel and Jordan, where we'll be heading next year. Just talking about the region for a minute, you know, they call this area the Holy Land, and you know, it really, the Holy Land covers basically Israel, the western part of Jordan, the southern part of Lebanon. It's all of these very, very significant historical sites in and around the Jordan Valley that are of great importance, because this is sort of the mecca, if you will, pardon the pun, for three major religions, obviously Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, and they're all concentrated in this area, and there are all monuments that are shared, or maybe shared is the wrong word, but they're all respected by each of these religions. And that's why travel through here is so interesting, because you get to see and understand and learn about the interrelation of these different cultures and religions over the centuries. And not to mention that it's also scenery wise just a beautiful, beautiful part of the world. It does have you beg the question, though, when you travel around here sometimes and you see people sort of living and working and caring about their life, you wonder what all the fuss is about, all of this, you know, political drama that has unfolded over decades and decades. And frankly, it's gone on a lot longer than that. So our trip is designed to give you a little bit of an insight into all of that. Looking at the map specifically of where we're going, we've changed the trip up this year, as we often do. So our popular trips we run year after year, or perhaps every couple of years. This was a very popular trip. It was quite, we had quite a large, an unusually large group. We'll be going with a smaller group next year for sure. And we'll start off in Tel Aviv, of course, which is the main city, depending on who you ask, the capital of Israel. And we'll spend a few days there, visiting that region and up to the north, which is also new this year, before continuing on to Jerusalem and visiting, of course, that city and the surrounding areas. Then we'll continue on to Jordan overland. So we're going to travel through Palestine, across the border to the Dead Sea, where we'll be spending a few nights in that amazing scenery. And then we'll head down from there to Petra to see the famous Rose City. And then one last overnight in Wadi, which is a desert area in the very south part of Jordan. So that's the overview of our trip. Let's take a little bit more of a look day to day in terms of what we're going to do. So we start off the trip. Our trip starts on November the 2nd. So leaving from pretty much anywhere in Canada means an overnight flight. So you'd leave on the 1st of November, as I say, 1 year from now. And we'll pull into Tel Aviv the morning of the next day. The nice thing is that depending on if you're doing this program or this combined with Egypt, the flight routing that you take, but usually you'll arrive sometime in before noon. And so once we arrive in Tel Aviv, we're going to be staying at a wonderful hotel right down on the beach, which is well situated because you've got access to this beautiful promenade that you can see in the picture. And Tel Aviv is a very modern city, and it'll strike you the moment you land is that the cars look like that they're at home, the buildings look like they're from North America. A large part of it, you kind of almost do a double take, if you will, because last year we came from Egypt, and Cairo and Tel Aviv look completely different. I mean, you can imagine how Cairo looks. And yet Tel Aviv, all of Israel is clean and modern. It's absolutely fascinating. So as I say, we'll have a great hotel right down on the beach where we'll be able to access the city. We'll have a good part of the day to enjoy it and just stroll along this beautiful promenade. I was really, really taken by it. I remember when we were there last year, a bunch of us, we just walked all the way down to JAFFA and took in this rather amazing city. So we'll spend the first part of our touring the first day. I generally like to have a bit of a relaxing day on the first day. So we'll do a nice half-day tour walking around the old port of Jaffa, which when you walk around is reminiscent of what you kind of expect from a city in the Middle East. The buildings date back centuries, and they have some terrific little cafes and shops, and it's a very quaint part of Tel Aviv. And there's other sort of little enclaves like that, but Jaffa is the most famous of them. So we're going to probably spend about a half a day before we give you some time to take it in on your own, because that was the one sort of bit of feedback we got from last year. We didn't have quite enough time in Tel Aviv. This time we're going to spend a few more nights and get to know it a little bit better. The next day is when some of our more rigorous touring begins, and we're going to go up and visit the north part of Israel. Why? We didn't go there this year, and again, I think that there was a little bit more to be had from Israel than what we saw. A lot of people focus their trip on sort of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, but I think to visit Haifa and these incredible gardens, the so-called Bahai gardens that you see here, again with a magnificent view overlooking the Mediterranean, it's an extra little added bonus. And then when we combine Haifa with Nazareth, which will be the other part of the day, Nazareth, of course, in the sort of north eastern part of Israel up towards the Sea of Galilee, and it's actually the biggest Arab city in Israel. So you get quite a juxtaposition. They've got a large souk there, which a souk is an Arab word for market, where you get a whole array of stuff that's produced. And here's the thing about Israel that I didn't clearly realize until I went there, right? And we all think of Israel that everybody that lives there is of Jewish faith, but in fact, Christians live there, Arabs live there, and perhaps a handful of other religions. So it's fascinating to see, particularly if you go to a city like Nazareth, how the Israeli cultural and mindset is works together with people who are of Islamic background. It's really quite fascinating. And we'll also do our first wine tasting here. And I don't know how many Israeli wines that you've had, but I can tell you they are very pleasantly better than you would expect. Let's put it that way. So that'll be our first day, first full day. And we'll then spend our last night in Tel Aviv and head up to Jerusalem. It's not far away. A lot of trips, they will do a day trip out to Jerusalem, but I insisted, and I think we appreciated that from our last trip, spending a full 4 nights here, because you need time to just wander this city. And of course, we're going to start off having a walking tour. We'll on the first day when we get in, again, a bit more relaxed. That's how we like it. We don't want to be too stressed. We're going to take in some of the new city, but after our first overnight, when we have time to be a little bit more refreshed, we're going to go up to the Mount of Olives, which is essentially where this photograph is taken. And we're going to get an incredible overview of the old city of Jerusalem. And this is really the crux of what you come to Israel for, is to understand what Jerusalem means, what it's all about. It's a city that's separated into quarters. You've got the Armenian quarter, the Christian quarter, the Jewish quarter, the Arab quarter. And when you walk around all of these narrow streets with all of the markets, and you go from one to the other without even realizing, I mean, certainly there's a little sign there that says, oh, you're entering the Armenian sector, whatever it happens to be. And sort of people live and work together. You wouldn't really have a sense of the, internal strife and conflict that has prevailed in Jerusalem for so many years. And that's what makes it so fascinating. We'll visit the Western Wall. Joel, if you could just advance the slides there. Yeah. So we'll one of the sites we'll undoubtedly visit on our full day guided tour through here is the Wailing Wall, or the Western Wall, which is depicted here, the most important site in Judaism. And I must say, I learned a tremendous amount about that religion, that culture, and all of the implications that it has on modern politics. Learned so much as we were walking around Jerusalem. We'll probably spend half to 3/4 of a day together with the guide, but we'll leave lots of time, because you could literally walk around the old city of Jerusalem for days and days. There's so many little nooks and crannies to discover there. After spending a night in Jerusalem, and the good thing is that we're staying not too far from the old city. It's roughly about a 20-minute walk from the JAFFA gate to where our hotel is going to be situated, which means that you have the chance to go back in any day, in the evening or whenever we get back from one of our other excursions. Needless to say, you can't visit Jerusalem without heading to Bethlehem. And so Bethlehem, of course, is located in the Palestine territory. It's not all that far from Jerusalem, but part of visiting Bethlehem, the obvious reason, the place where Christ was born. But I think for a lot of us, it was seeing, as we passed from Israeli territory into Palestinian territory, and the differences that prevail between those two cultures. And frankly, the wealth gap becomes very, very apparent. And of course, there's a long fence that they put up. And although there's no border per se, there certainly are checkpoints. And everything that we sort of heard and hear in the media about the conflicts and the tensions and so on, it becomes very real when you see the division, as I say, between Israel and Palestine. Bethlehem, situated just over in the Palestine territory, and it's a remarkable city to walk around. No, not least of which for the Church of the Nativity, which is again the place where Christ was born. Regardless of your religious affiliation or how religious you are, I must say that it is a place that it stirs up some kind of thoughts and emotion when you're at this place where Christ was allegedly born. They've got a silver star there, but I know when we went, there was this gigantic lineup, and so a couple of people sort of took the whole trip because they were, adamant that they wanted to go to that exact spot, and yeah, it's fascinating. It's fascinating to see. So we'll spend a good part of the day and over lunch in and around Bethlehem. In the afternoon, we'll head back to Jerusalem and we'll visit another very, very important shrine, which will be the Yad Vashem Holocaust Museum. Come up in the news quite a bit recently, and much like visiting, Dachau or so on itself, or Theresienstadt, or one of the concentration camps. This memorial, very, very well done, very sobering. And, you can't say that it's a pleasant place to visit, but you come away with a different sort of understanding, a different feeling about everything that transpired during that horrible period in time during the Second World War. So a very full day, but one that will no doubt remain in your mind for a long time. Our other full day trip, or almost full day, will be down to Masada, and Masada is essentially a rock fortress that is situated not far from the Dead Sea. In fact, it'll be a beautiful drive along the western shore of the Dead Sea, and we'll make our way up to this mountain that King Herod built his fortress on. And you've just got sort of the ruins that remain there, but it's the views around the region that are particularly striking. It's at this point, everything to the south is pretty much desert. It looks like what you see in the photograph. Very, very dramatic landscape, and then with the Dead Sea in the background. And we'll look out over the Dead Sea, knowing that the following day, of course, we're going to be crossing over into Jordan, and we're going to be staying on the other side of that body of water. So that'll be our day in Masada, but we'll have you back in Jerusalem in time so that we can enjoy one sort of final cocktail or a glass of nice Israeli wine before we depart the next day for Jordan. So as I mentioned before, we're going to cross Jordan overland. So we're going to cross through the Palestine territory once again, and to the Allenby Bridge, or as the Jordanians refer to it as the King Hussein Bridge, that crosses the Jordan River. And then a short time later, about 40 minutes later, we will be on the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea, of course, as you will undoubtedly know from geography class, the lowest point on Earth, at over 400 meters below sea level. So all of these mountains here, sort of the top of them are roughly where sea level is. So it's a different feeling, because there's not many places that we go in North America where you can get very far below sea level, if at all. And so, the oxygen is richer. You feel more invigorated, right, when you're down there. Not to mention that the sea itself, which of course is super salinated, such that you can wade in and float basically on the surface and read a book. If anybody saw one of my newsletters that I produced from when we were down there, you'll see I was just reading a book while floating in the Dead Sea. It's a very neat thing to do. So we'll have some time there. We'll have 3 nights staying at a wonderful resort, the Mövenpick resort on the Dead Sea. And from here, we're going to be able to go and see some of the highlights of the central part of Jordan, in particular Amman. And this past trip, we had this as an optional trip that about a third of our group went on. And I kind of regret that we hadn't included it for everybody, because it was really, really incredible to visit this white city. And all of, most of the city, there's obviously a very new modern part with all the skyscrapers and so on. But when you stand up on the hill, the sort of the Acropolis that they have up there, you see the ruins of it, you you get a sense of how the uniformity of all of these buildings, that, in some cases, in many cases, they're not even all that old. There are some certain very historical parts of Amman, but you sort of can't tell the difference between, the areas of wealthy people and less wealthy people. And we are going to take an in-depth trip. I'm hoping that we'll have the same guide that we had last year. At least that's the plan. And he brought us sort of from the so-called rich side to the poor side of Amman, which, again, looking architecturally, you could hardly tell the difference, except the buildings were more dilapidated on one side of the street than the other. And we'll gain an understanding into what the way of life of Jordanian people. This is a country we don't know a lot about, right? I mean, we all know about the king of Jordan, and you hear sort of about these high-level talks, but we understand very little about Jordan itself. And so, visiting Amman is really quite an experience. So yeah, it'll be a wonderful day. Back to the Mövenpick in the evening, and then the next day, because we always like to have some leisure time on our trip, we're going to have a whole day to just enjoy the Dead Sea. And of course, floating in the Dead Sea and then going down to the coastline and covering yourself in all of this very mineral-rich mud, which you come out of there completely black from head to toe, and it's a very wonderful and invigorating feeling. So I think everybody this year enjoyed the Dead Sea thoroughly, and all of the spa facilities and so on that go along with it that the hotel has to offer. So it'll be a wonderful, relaxing day. And we went at the coldest time of the year, and the water temperature was remarkably warm. I think that I'm sure everybody went in at least a couple of times during our stay at the Dead Sea. So you'll enjoy it a lot. So from the Dead Sea, we're then going to go for the last part of our trip, which takes us down to the south part of Jordan. And on our way, we're going to stop at Mount Nebo, which is, of course, where Moses stood and look out over the Jordan Valley. Once again, the views are amazing. This is the one thing that I think you can't even appreciate from the pictures. The scenery is absolutely breathtaking here. Up in the same area as Mount Nebo is Madaba, which is a very quaint city. And in here, they have this very famous tile mosaic that's like 1,400 years old. It's amazing that you can look at a map in this format, even though you can't sort of understand the words and so on, but you can position all of the key cities. And it's really then that it makes it apparent, how historical everything really is. It's not just, you just talk about it in the history books, but when you actually see this map that's on the floor, this beautifully preserved mosaic map, it's quite remarkable. I remember as well that on this trip we picked up a whole bunch of nuts and fruits. They have wonderful little markets and stands all along the streets there that provided us some sustenance for the drive down through the desert. We'll make our way all the way down to Petra. It's a bit of a drive. It's about 3.5 hours from Madaba, and you don't see much but wide open desert and some huge gorges. The scenery is everything and nothing is kind of how I would explain it. And then, of course, we'll be in Petra, and Petra is undoubtedly the highlight of this part of the trip. I think on the feedback we got from this year, everybody enjoyed it. It was the number one stop, of course, the Rose City of Petra, and we'll spend 2 nights here. The interesting thing is that there's not much else to do in the city other than visiting the Rose City, other than visiting this incredible sacred city. Because the actual town outside of Petra doesn't really have a lot to offer. So, we'll arrive in the evening anyway. We'll have an overnight. We'll be nice and refreshed for the morning, because it's a fairly long trek down this gorge to get into the city. People tell you it's a long walk. It's a long walk. And yet everybody made it without any problem whatsoever in our group. And as you go through this magnificent gorge, After about a 45 minutes of walking or so, you arrive at this site here, the Treasury, which will probably be familiar to you through, having seen it in National Geographic or some documentary. But seeing this building and all of these buildings, because this is one of hundreds of buildings that are carved out of the sandstone something like 2,000 years ago, will really just, make your skin crawl up. I mean, in a good way, right? It just sends shivers down your spine is what I'm trying to say. Um, truly, truly fantastic. And you look at it and you can't help but to wonder how they were able to chisel an entire city out of the rock. So we'll spend the whole day in there, and the good part of it is that we arrange so that we get a guided explanation of all of the significant spots. But there's far more to see than you can imagine. Again, this is one of the things you don't necessarily know until you either hear somebody talking about it in detail. But there are trails and there are enclaves and cities going all over the place in this huge valley. So you couldn't actually see all of it in one day, because some of these trails go way up into the mountains, and you need hours and hours to be able to capture everything. But I think in one day you'll be exhausted at the end, but you will have had a good sense of what this place is all about. After lunch, we always leave free time, and I know that there was a handful of us last year that I think we were among the last people to leave before sunset, before coming back to our hotel. It was exhausting, but incredibly, incredibly rewarding. So after a restful night at our hotel in Petra, we'll head down for our final night of the trip. And this is an add-on as well for this year. We weren't able to get down this earlier this year on our trip, but we are going to make a stop at Wadi Rum. And Wadi Rum is a desert area. I think the picture basically tells the whole story. It's they relate to it like the moon. In fact, it's sometimes called like the Valley of the Moon. Incredible vast desert landscapes with these mountains rising out of it. We're going to take 4x4s around and explore some of this vast desert, and we're going to celebrate our final night by staying at a luxury tented Bedouin camp, which will be a very neat experience and a very fitting end to a trip through this remarkable part of the Middle East. So I think that all who come will enjoy that thoroughly. The next day, we'll make the long ride back up to Amman. It's about a 4-hour drive. Obviously, we'll have our usual rest stops along the way. And for those who are going to continue on to our program to Jordan, we will head straight to the airport in Amman and make the quick flight over to Cairo and continue from there. And if you are joining just for Israel and Jordan, we'll have put in the program one final night at Ma'in, which is a beautiful hot spring resort not far from the Dead Sea. We did a stop here for lunch this past year. We had a grand time swimming in the thermal waters, and so we'll have a chance to experience that if you're going to end the trip there with us. And as I say, otherwise, we'll continue on to Egypt. So that is, in a nutshell, our Israel and Jordan program. So it's almost 2 weeks in duration. We'll cover a lot of ground, but at the same time, we're going to do it as usual in the wheel and anchor fashion, in a relaxed kind of a way. I'll give you a few of the details, of course, all the information in our brochure. If you haven't already gotten a copy, you can grab one off of our website or just drop us a note. We'll send you the PDF file over. Happening next November 2nd to the 15th. It's going to be 6830 in double occupancy and 9160 in single occupancy. Everything, of course, in Canadian dollars. I'm not going to go through all the inclusions as usual, but yeah, pretty much everything that you need is there. We've got 14 nights of accommodation at 4- and 5-star hotels, and either lunch or dinner each day. I generally, as a rule, do 2 meals a day, so breakfast and lunch or dinner, because I find that when you do 3 meals a day, it's just too much for a lot of people. So we have a lot of nice lunches that are included on this trip. It also gives you the chance to go and explore out and have dinner on your own, which is, part of the fun as well, is exploring a little bit on your own. Not much in the way of exclusions, the usual thing, airfare, which we can assist you with, and cancellation insurance, critical these days. That goes without saying. But pretty much everything else is in our program. As far as airfare is concerned, of course, we will be more than happy to help you out with that, depending on where it is that you're coming from in Canada. So as many of you will know, I'm not a big fan of the group tickets that sort of force everybody onto the same flights, and then you don't get seat selection, and there's all kinds of drawbacks to it. So we prefer to pick the flight routing that suits you best. And of course, as is always the case with our trips, we provide private transfers from the airport to the hotel on arrival. So you don't have to, so when you arrive isn't really a factor. We'll make sure that you're greeted and brought to the hotel no matter what time your flight arrives. You're looking at $1,200 to $1,400 if you fly from Toronto, for example, into Tel Aviv and back out of Amman. And the price would be roughly the same if you're going to include the Egypt trip. So that's about the price for the transatlantic airfares. Of course, it's all a little bit up in the air, and depending on how the COVID affects the airline business, but we're optimistic that prices should stay in that ballpark. I think I wanted to, when we look at travel for the future, and let's face it, things are going to look different, following this pandemic in terms of how we're able to travel, and we may choose to travel less and take longer trips. And we've speculated on some of this in our earlier travel forums. So you really want to be clear on why it is that you're going on any particular trip. So I've made a point of sort of highlighting what I think the 3 reasons are why you'd want to consider coming on this trip. First of all, Petra. I mean, it has to be one of the most impressive archaeological sites, not just in the Middle East, but frankly, anywhere. I mean, it ranks right up there with Angkor Wat or Chichen Itza or even Machu Picchu. I mean, it's such a dramatic site. Petra is a must-see. I think should be on everyone's bucket list. Secondly, floating in the Dead Sea is an experience that's out of this world. There's not that many saline lakes in the world where you have the opportunity to float like you can on the Dead Sea. It's a lot of fun. That's why we spend a couple of days there, because it's just a neat experience and something it's more interesting to explain to the grandkids than it is talking about Petra, because it's like we floated on the sea and we could read the newspaper. And finally, the third reason why I think this is the trip to consider is visiting the old city of Jerusalem. Jerusalem, as you know, it's in the media all the time, unfortunately, usually for all the wrong reasons, but to really gain an understanding about what this city is all about. I can't tell you how much I learned. I thought you learn it all in high school, the history of Israel and these cultures. But when you're actually there with our great guides, it changes your perspective a little bit on how you look at Israel in this part of the world. So those are the 3 reasons why I think it is worth going on this trip to Israel and Jordan. So before we get to the Q&A session, just to let you know about our next webinar, which is Incredible Train Journeys Part 1. Part 1 of 4 parts. We're going to have 4 different parts to this. We had a lot of interest in train journeys, so I'm excited to share with you some of my favorites from around the world. That's next week, November the 5th at 11 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. Stay tuned for that. If you haven't already signed up, please come on along. And then if you don't get your questions answered now, then please drop us an email, give us a call. Our contact information is there. It's on our website. We look forward to hearing from you. So now I'm going to go back to my chat box and look at the questions. A comment from Dee about not all the meals are included. Yeah, so it's a good point, Dee, and this is exactly you've hit the nail on the head. I just group meals are fine when they make sense and when you have a good restaurant and all those factors. But I think people like to go a la carte and just kind of do their own thing and build their little groups and their little cliques. Anyway, I have my reasons, so that's good. Then let's see, we have a question, one of my questions here. So James asked, what's the temperature like in the desert at Wadi Rum? So the desert is the desert, right? So it can be very warm during the day. We picked November because it's warmer than it was when we were there in January. Our weather was on the cool side. It was actually very pleasant in Petra, but it does get cold at night. So you definitely need to bring a few warm things. Remember, you're sleeping, you're going to be all tucked in and so on and so forth. So even though that it's cold at night, you don't need to pack your suitcase with winter wear, but it's wise to bring in that, a sweater or a shell or something like that. You may need it in Egypt as well if you continue on for that. Peter is wondering about the currency in Jordan and Israel. So Jordan, Israel each obviously have their own currencies. In Jordan, it's the dinar, which is 1 dinar is about 50 cents Canadian. And in Israel, it is the shekel. So it's a lot of people try to procure foreign currencies at home. I have to say Canada is not the best place to procure foreign currencies. It's possible, but generally you get a bad rate and it's a bit of an ordeal. So the good old ATM card, you can pop it in any bank machine, is by far the easiest way to get any cash that you might need. Just see, no, I'm just going to note a couple other comments here. Fran's comment that if you're Christian, it is the trip to take from a faith perspective. That says it all. I think that no matter what faith you have, there's a tremendous amount of learning about all the faiths, as I described a little bit earlier. And let's see. And Tracy asked if the minerals from the Dead Sea really make you younger. Well, Tracy, you're going to have to come along in the trip and find out for yourself. I know that everybody bought a lot of them. I did as well. And I don't know, can you see if I still have wrinkles? Anyway, they do purport to have incredible benefits. And I would hope so, because even though you buy them right from the Dead Sea, they're not exactly inexpensive. Anyway, I'll have to take a poll of our members to see if they got any younger by putting all those wonderful Dead Sea products. I think a lot of us just brought plastic water bottles and filled them full of Dead Sea mud. I know I still have mine. I haven't even used it since we were there. Oh, okay, one last question from Irene. Are there any options besides walking into Petra? I've heard it's a long way. Yeah, it's a very good question, Irene. I meant to mention that. So it's a long walk, and we do want to make sure that everybody's able to make it without suffering too much. And we did have some people on our trip who had a little bit of trouble, particularly with walking that distance. In total, you'll walk easily 12 kilometers that day if you walk all the way down to the bottom and back. You can go for part of the way. They've got horse and carriage or donkeys or mules that will take those who are a little bit weary. And so that is available, and we had no problem getting them for those who need it. They say sometimes it can be super busy, but usually our guides have a way to finagle us getting any assistance with that kind of transportation. So it makes the rise a lot. It's a little bit bumpy in a horse and carriage, but it's quite humorous. I can honestly say. Good. I don't see any other questions, but as I say, as always, please do drop us a note if you have anything you'd like to know about this trip or any of our trips. Always pleased to hear from you. And I look forward to, I thank you for joining us for today's webinar on the Holy Land, Israel and Jordan. And yeah, hopefully you'll join us. Just as a side note, we are, as with all of our programs, we are still basically taking names, but we're not taking deposits at this point in time, just given the uncertainty regarding COVID-19. So feel free, if you feel like you're interested, give us a call, drop us an email, let us know. We'll put you down on the list. And we'll worry about the deposits sort of, early next year once we have a clearer picture on where the world is going. In the meantime, and one last comment from Fran, if you're going to go to Jordan, read the book Married to a Bedouin. I've heard this before as well. A terrific read. And if nothing else, it might even persuade you into going if you hadn't thought about it otherwise. Thanks again for joining us. Have yourselves a great day, and I look forward to catching you next week on our train journeys or on one of our upcoming webinars. Have a good one.